Hi, I'm Simon Hunt, an author and consultant, a parent to two lovely children. And from Monday to Thursday, you will find me in my Year 3-4 class at Tottington Primary School. Today, I'm delighted to be hosting this TTS Little Lockdowners question and answer session, where we'll be exploring ways to close the critical skills gap in primary learners. I'm joined by Rachel Clarke, reading expert, educational trainer, author and business owner. And Rachel will be offering solutions, advice and guidance for development gaps in reading. Now, I'm really got some fantastic questions for you today, Rachel. But before we get into that, I'd love you to explain a little bit about yourself, your work and your background.
Oh, thank you for that. I mean, you've already told everyone what I do for a living. I've been in education for over 25 years now. And during that time, I've been a teacher, I've been an English subject leader, I've been a deputy head teacher and a local authority English consultant. So quite a lot. And now I work as a freelance education consultant and writer and talk about reading every single day of my life.
Thank you, Rachel. I don't know how you have time to have done all those things. I have no idea how you do that. Right. So what we're going to do is we're going to get into the questions. And my first question is this. So what impact do you think the pandemic has had upon reading, particularly in primary learners? And do you think these challenges were here pre-pandemic? And do you think these challenges have now been exacerbated as we're coming out of the other end?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think there are a lot of anecdotal experiences, and different teachers therefore have had different experiences. We've got children who didn't encounter any difficulties with reading, for example, because they come from book-rich homes, and so they've had access to books, they've been able to continue reading. They may not have had experienced gaps therefore. We've also had children who have experienced incredible difficulties because they weren't able to change their books easily. They didn't have books at home, and so therefore gaps have appeared. There is some research that's been undertaken by the EEF. So there was some research undertaken during that period of lockdowns, and then there's some that's been published more recently. And in both of those pieces of research, actually, what we see is that there are gaps. Children have experienced difficulties with inference, with emotional literacy, and with emotional vocabulary. But you and I both know, actually, as teachers, that inference is always a problem. Children find inference incredibly difficult. And so I think what we've probably found here, and it's hinted to in that research as well, is that that period of lockdown has exacerbated an existing problem for children.
I completely agree with what you're saying there, Rachel, because when we had children home at lockdown, those that would get the reading diary signed and would read at home sort of continued on that trajectory. There's a little bit of a dip, but those that didn't, those you had to really push and really get them right. Okay, can we make sure you read this weekend, read with your parents? That kind of went down. So when the children have come back, the gap that was here now is kind of gone sort of like this. This is what I found in my class, and I know a lot of other teachers have found the same. So it's really interesting that you said that there's a research around that. This next question, I love this next question because how can we engage reading literacy in the classroom to make it more fun? So how do we incorporate it into everyday life so that they're learning without even realizing, which I think is the best learning is when they don't have any awareness that it's even happening.
Okay, I'm going to sound like a bit of a grumpy boots here because I'm going to try and reframe fun into engaging, because I do sometimes worry that if we're telling teachers that everything's got to be fun, that we might just take our focus upon learning. And I think whenever we plan a lesson or a series of lessons, we need to think about what do the children need to learn? What's the journey I'm going to go on in order that they do learn? And I do think if we start from that idea, what fun activities am I going to do? We might be led by the activities rather than the learning. So that's just a little bit of a tweak for me on how we approach that. I think that engagement for children comes in many different forms. We're talking about reading today. It might be that you need to engage them by building up some background knowledge, and that could come through watching a video together. It might be that you are leading a conversation with them where they're exploring knowledge, they are talking to each other, they're sharing ideas, and so they are engaged in learning through that process of exploratory talk. It could be about choosing, and this is the bit that I really like, is about choosing a great book that enthuses them, and then that gets them really hooked onto the learning that you've got in place for them. And then you talk about learning without knowing that you're learning. I think our early years colleagues are the best at this. They're just experts, aren't they, at setting up what appears to be an activity, but there's so much learning behind it. For me, as an English consultant, I'm going to go back to books, and I'm going to say actually that when you read, you are learning by the back door, aren't you? I think about books I've read. I love information books and always have done. And so I'm gaining information from those. But I love novels as well. And I might read a novel set in World War II, and it's a great adventure story, or it's a great friendship story, for example. But also there's all that contextual information about the historical setting. And so I'm learning without realizing I'm learning through reading that book. And that also then makes me think about, I don't know if you've read it yet, Simon, the report that came out from Ofsted at the end of May. And it talked about research that will help us with English. And in there, it talks about the need to give children background information before we approach a teaching sequence with them, but it also talks about the knowledge that they gain through the process of learning as well. So loads of things there, but books, of course, coming to the fore once again.
I completely agree with what you're saying there. So if the children are engaged, then the fun will come through the engagement of and that's what we do at school. And with the reception children, I agree with what you said there. So my daughter, she's in reception right now. So their book, they're looking at seaside. So, but before they look at seaside books, in 2 days, I'm looking at the clock like that will give me the date. But in 2 days, they're going to the beach first. So some of the children that haven't gone to the beach, because we're right in the center, we're in Manchester, they'll get to go to the beach and experience that. And then when they're looking at books about the beach, then they've got that experience. And that happens in reception quite a lot. But I think that sort of disappears a little bit the higher up when you go to year 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You've got some quite difficult concepts for children to grasp and understand. And then you're given a book or a novel or a text that they can't sort of, they need to be able to sort of understand it first before you look at a book, and it really helps with their understanding and engagement of a book. That's what I found. I think that's really interesting that you'd say that, Rachel. Thank you. That's a great answer. Right, my next question. So what areas in children's reading have you noticed a decline in as a result of the pandemic, and do you think there's any suggestions of how these challenges can be overcome?
Okay, I think I'm probably going to go back to, we talked earlier, didn't we, about inference, emotional vocabulary, emotional literacy. I'm going to stick with those, I think. When it comes to inferencing, then it's a problem. Do we need some ideas, some support for teachers? It's knowing what inference is, isn't it? It's such a broad set of skills. I've done reading on this in the past, and there are over 30 different types of inference. We don't need to know all of those in primary, thank goodness. But knowing how to help children to make inferences, for example, when they are reading, this is really important for our strivers, those children that are really struggling with reading, so that they recognise that maybe in one sentence you're talking about Sarah went to the beach, and in the next sentence you might have she made a sandcastle. And you and I, as experienced readers, will link Sarah and she straight away and know that those two sentences link for that reason. A lot of really children that are struggling with reading often struggle making that connection. So doing some work around pronouns, for example, can be really, really important for those children. Teaching them how to create that golden thread, through a piece of text. And one of the great things about doing that, of course, is that it's not just a reading skill, it's actually that cohesion skill that you want in their writing as well. So that's well worth doing. Other things in inferencing that children find quite difficult, and it tips into that stuff about emotional literacy, is visualization. So visualizing how a character might feel, for example. So you're being told that someone feels grumpy or they feel exasperated, and undertaking role plays so that children show you through their emotions or through their gesticulations what those emotive words mean. So those kind of things can be really helpful for unlocking that little bit of learning for them. I'd also point towards great books that build that emotional language and that emotional literacy. I don't know if you've seen Barbara Throws a Wobbler. I don't know if you've seen that. Oh, it's great. So that's by Nadia Shirin, and that is a great book about a child having, a bit of a wobbler, throwing a tantrum. So that's great. What else would work there? Things like the Worrysaurus by Rachel Bright. So that's a really popular book that deals with that issue of worry and anxiety that lots of our children have. How's that then? Is that helpful?
No, that's a fantastic answer, because with what you said about the emotional literacy side of it and the infants has always been a thing for teachers, but it's something we're constantly working through. Infants introduction, we could talk about that for hours alone, but I think the emotional literacy side of it, so because a lot of our children have been separated from groups of children and being able to have that social interaction, that's something I've noticed very much so in my class over the past year or two, because they're not having that emotional connection with other children as they would usually do in the classroom, and just having that experience, and then being a bit anxious when we do come back to school, and some of their parents are anxious as well, depending on what's happened over the past 2 years. And like my year threes, I teach year 3 and 4, so my year threes haven't had a normal and since the pandemic year, since year 1, I think it is. I think it happened in year 1. So most of their school life has been in and out of school, bubbles closing, this pandemic that happened. They've gone through a lot. They're very resilient, but they have gone through a lot as well. And also the teachers teaching their children have also gone through quite a lot as well. So it's difficult both ends. So that's I completely agree with that. And I'm also writing these books down as well as we go through them, because I love books. That's my favorite thing in the world is books. I'm writing these down. I'm going to end up with a big Amazon wish list by the time I finish this. But I'll just quickly I'll buy some of those after we've done. Right. So my next question is basically more on the planning side of it. So what should teachers be focused on, so to say, with their curriculum planning? So at the start of the post-pandemic, there were lots of advice on the basic skills. So do you think there's still a need for that, or should we be focusing on like the breadth of the back to our pre-pandemic curriculum?
There's loads, isn't there, that's on teachers' shoulders at the moment. I mean, talking to teachers, I worked with quite a few teachers last week through various training sessions I was doing, and there was very much the sense that these past few months, since we've been trying to go about things in a more normal way, they have done everything and more. And so they have been delivering catch-up, they have been filling gaps, they've been trying to deliver the curriculum as normal, and they have been doing enrichment activities by the bucket load to ensure that children have all those activities that they missed out on in the past. And we can't continue like that. I mean, everybody is so tired at the moment, aren't they? So we are going to have to make some decisions and some choices about what we do moving forward. I do think that we have to continue to keep an eye on those gaps, and they're not the same everywhere we go. We know that different groups of children, for whatever specific reasons they've got, have got different gaps. And so it's using assessment for learning to identify those gaps and to address them. It may mean at the beginning of units of work that we are starting with some gap filling. We're starting at a slightly earlier point than we would have done in the past. I do think that we need to bear in mind, you talked about your year threes earlier on and some of the experiences they've missed out on, and we might need to think about how we design those learning activities, not just for engagement, but so that we are giving the children the experiences that they need, that they may need to build on. So some of our younger children, for example, handwriting isn't particularly well developed because they missed out on some of their gross and fine motor skill play in reception in year 1. So it's ensuring that they have the time to build up those skills. With some of our readers, it is making sure that they have had an experience of the range of different types of texts. It's also making sure that all skills are in place. Everybody has passed that phonics screening check, that children have experienced a range of different comprehension skills. They're all being given the opportunity to read fluently and expressively, to read a wide range of texts. So I feel as I'm probably sitting on the fence a little bit with this response, but we have to be led by assessment. We have to tailor the curriculum to meet the needs of the children in front of us, but we still have to maintain an eye, don't we, on what they need to do and ensure that they have that broad and balanced provision that they're all entitled to.
Fantastic, Rachel. Great answer. My next question is on the socioeconomic gap. Do you think there is a gap when it comes to reading? And if there is, how can we address it?
I think there is a gap. When we look at analysis of scores in the phonics screening check, in Key Stage 1 SAT, in Key Stage 2 SAT, in areas of high economic and of high socioeconomic deprivation, children tend to score less well. That is documented in various places, but again was brought up in that recent Ofsted report on English, actually, about where children are doing well and not so well. So I think there is an issue. It is always about ambition. It's always about wanting to do the best that we possibly can for children. And having started my career in a school that really was that type of school with high levels of socioeconomic deprivation, teachers are working incredibly hard in those types of schools to ensure that children have the best possible start. Always alongside those ambitious, high standards, ensuring that all gaps are closed, children are aiming for age-related expectations. I think it's about providing that really rich and engaging literacy environment. And I'm like a stuck record. It's about books, and it's about reading, and it's about the pleasure of reading, and ensuring that your school is set up so that those children can be successful as readers. And it's quite old now, but research from the OECD into reading for pleasure is quoted quite often. And within that documentation, it's the idea that when children read for pleasure, it makes up for that socioeconomic deprivation. And actually those children that do read for pleasure will be more successful than those children that don't. And it's a great leveler, isn't it, that if you start life with the disadvantages of your setting, if you read and you read for pleasure, you can iron out those disadvantages and you can make progress. And I think we have to hang on to that, don't we? And we have to make sure that we put everything that we possibly can in place to ensure that children read for pleasure, because it will make a difference to their outcomes.
That's a perfect answer, Rachel. And it's the reading for pleasure, and it's the culture within the school and with the teachers. Because I get really excited. I get sometimes overexcited, but because I get excited about reading and writing and literacy and all different types of stuff, I know my kids, it feeds off, it filters down, and I can see them getting excited. And especially because, I have quite a lot of reluctant writers, because I have a few boys in my class, but they see, I forgot how old I was, 41-year-old teacher getting really excited about books, and they're like, well, if it's okay for Mr. Hunt, then it's okay for me as well. And I've really noticed that them come along and get excited and coming to show me their writing, and it's really nice to see. And it's all about books. At the moment, we're reading The Journey by Francesca Sanna, so I absolutely love that book. We've been doing it today, and because of what's going on with the whole Ukraine thing at the moment, it really makes it quite relevant as well. It's always relevant anyway, but right, and it's world what day is it today?
It's Empathy Day today.
Yeah, it's Empathy Day as well. Yeah, so it really fits as well. So yeah, so that's just one of my books that I'm really into at the moment. So it's a fantastic book. Look it up. It's great if anyone's listening.
I've got that book, and it is just fabulous.
Beautiful, isn't it?
There's not a lot of text, but through the illustrations, it just talks to you really, really strongly, doesn't it? It's
a one. I could spend, honestly, Rachel, I could probably spend about 2 or 3 hours just talking about that book alone, but I do have more questions to get through as well. So, and this next question, if you can answer this perfectly, Rachel, for every teacher out there, then you'd be a millionaire. So
let's see what I can do then.
what is really successful in engaging reluctant readers to become more engaged in reading? So what's the magic potion or spell that we can do?
Okay, reluctant readers. I'm going to start off by defining them, because they're not the strivers usually. The strivers are another group, aren't they, who are really finding reading difficult, but the reluctant ones, they can read, but they choose not to. And they're really frustrating as a teacher, aren't they? Because you can see that they've got the skills, but they haven't got the will to read. So with this little group of children, it is about effort and it's about engagement, and it's about, with you, the way you describe yourself as a teacher, it is about that role modeling, the absolute joy and fascination of reading. So you are a role model. Things that you can do to get these children hooked on books then is to read to them every day if you can, regularly. And there's a thing with children where they know that teachers read the good books, and that if you can read a book to them that grabs them, they're likely to want to go and read that book. So choose something that is likely to grab that group of children. You know what they're interested in. And it's one of the great things about being a primary school teacher, is that you're with them all day, and so you know what each member of the class is into. A good thing to do when you read that book aloud is to choose something that's in a series, because if you read the first one and then you've got a shelf stacked with all the others from that series, it lights the fire and they can go away. First of all, they're all going to scramble to read the one that you've read, but then they've got those other books to read as well. If you haven't got a book in series to read, choose something by an author who's reasonably prolific for the same reason, because if they have got access to that author and they've liked them, then they can leapfrog onto other titles by that particular author. Books that talk to them about what they're interested in. Now, I am a lover of beautiful illustrated books, and I urge you to have lots of beautiful illustrated books for these children. But a lot of the books that I really love are like award winners, so Kate Greenaway award winners, books with status that we really want children to read, and we must have those books. But I think we also have to have those books that as teachers we don't like as much, but the children really love them. So you may not like Captain Underpants, you may not like The Wimpy Kid, you may not like Rainbow Fairies. But if that's going to get those children reading, you've got to have it. And you've got to let them read it. And if they want to read it loads of times, let them read it loads of times, because reluctant readers just need to find the right book, and it will springboard them onto other books as well. Make sure you've got a good range of fiction, non-fiction, and poetry. A lot of children's poetry is funny, and children love funny books. I call them huddle books. It's that book in your classroom where you get a little huddle of children around it. So the World Book of the Guinness World Book Record, I can't say it. The book with all the world records in it, they love that. And it really encourages, particularly boys seem to love that book because it gives them information that they can trade with each other. So they're really good books to have for reluctant readers, as are those lists of fact books, like 1,000 facts about animals, 1,000 facts about sport. Those kind of things really enthuse children to read. Those books where you can choose the direction that the narrative goes in, and then you can reread that and choose a different route to find your way through that book. So those kinds of things, it's just having a little bit of everything that really lights the fire of those children.
I agree, Rachel, because like you mentioned some of the books that maybe as a teacher you might not like, but who's to say what is is it up to me to tell a child that you shouldn't like this book? Because we all have different opinions, and we talk about that as teachers all the time. And when I was a child, I absolutely loved the Guinness World Record books that you mentioned, but I also really love those choose your ending stories, because I was familiar with the words in the text, so I could go back and then read it again and just choose a different one. And then I used to almost go, well, how many actually different endings could I actually get? And I think it really does, it really helped me as a reader. And that's where my love of books started, with those type of books. So I completely agree. Now, we've talked a lot about reading in school. So have you got any strategies that we can get for children to read at home as well?
A lot of it is much of the same, really, which is about access to something that they want to read, isn't it? Making sure they've got that. And I think we need to remember that not all of our children have got access to books at home. And so building in a culture into our school where we are prepared to send books home, and we are prepared to accept that sometimes they don't come back. It doesn't happen often, but you occasionally hear of children who aren't allowed to take a book home because they've lost so many in the past, and that's something that I feel is quite difficult to deal with, because some children haven't got books. So it's us being prepared to send books home and having plenty of books they can take. Now, our youngest children in school need to take home a decodable book. But a lot of schools also send another book home alongside that, something for parents to read with them or to them. And I'm all in favour of that, because it, for one, it allows you to use that stock of books that you've got in school and you've spent thousands of pounds on, and you can share those with the children. But also it helps to build that culture of parents reading to and with their children as well. With our older children, it's still take your reading scheme book home, but something from the classroom library or the school library as well. I think we need to encourage children to be members of local libraries, because again, it's access to books, it's not costly, so it's a fabulous opportunity for them. Making parents aware of that reading on screen is not problematic all of the time. Now, I don't know about you, but I spend hours on screen. Sometimes when I get my little screen reports, I'm horrified at how many hours I've spent. But I'm generally spending my time reading and doing something important by using my screen time. And actually, our children can be reading on screen. So it could be a Kindle, it could be a laptop, it could be an iPad. I've got an app for my iPad, which is called BorrowBox, and it allows me to read ebooks from my local library here in Coventry on my iPad. It's amazing. So I go to the library at all times of the day and choose books, including children's illustrated books, and read them at home free of charge on my iPad. So making parents aware that schemes like that are available, and that they can access books and their children can be reading whatever is available in their library at any time. So, there are lots of things that we can be doing.
Just while we're on that technology side there, Rachel, what are your thoughts on audiobooks? Because as an adult, when I'm doing the lawn or when I'm pottering around the house, I listen to audiobooks all the time. And I get lost when I sometimes take a bit longer to do the lawn if I'm in a really good chapter. So what are your thoughts on audiobooks?
Oh, they're fabulous, aren't they? And for our children, just as when we read to them, it's a model of fluency. And so they are getting that sense of what prosody sounds like, that beautiful lyrical reading that brings that text alive. So really, really in favour of them. And alongside that, if you do have a copy of the book as well as the audiobook, then it's like those old, I was going to say cassettes or CDs, from back in the old days, where you're reading alongside the text. And I think it's Tim Rosinski, who is the fluency expert. He talks about that as being a really good way for children to learn what fluency sounds like. So yeah, totally in favour of that.
Good, because it's really funny you mentioned. I used to have those Disney tape books when I was a child. I had loads of them, and I used to listen to them all the time, and they had the songs as well. So I know pretty much every Disney film from like 85 to 95. I know the songs. I'm not going to sing them now, but I do know pretty much every single one. But I've got some old audio CDs, or some audiobooks on CDs, and I give them to my children in class and say, take them home and have a listen. And I've got a copy of the book as well. So take the book with you as well, and then they'll follow along as well. So I found that really useful. And yeah, and I mean, some children don't have a CD player as well at home because it's all MP3s. But I do think, just like you said, listening to the expression and a bit of music as well, and something a little bit different, and to encourage the reader to, to follow along and to listen to stories. And then, like you said before, if that's a backdoor into picking up a book of a morning or a weekend, and then great, that's a great tool to use. I'm going to move to book corners now. So reading corners. What can we do as educators and teachers to make story time and reading corners more exciting and engaging for children?
Okay, right. First of all, so let's start with, you'll have to remind me that I'm going to talk about two things here. I'm going to start with the book corner, and I am going to pull my grumpy pants on again. And I'm going to say it's not about decoration. Teachers put so much effort into decorating book corners, and they do look beautiful. And it is nice to be surrounded by pleasant things and to be in a pleasant setting. However, it's not the decoration that builds the reader, it's the books that build the reader. And so if we're going to have really successful book corners, they need to have books in them that the children are going to read. Start off by auditing what you've got. A lot of classroom book corners are full of really old books, tatty books, books that people don't read anymore. So audit it and get rid of the old stuff. You're better off having less but better books in there. Another thing to do is to consider getting the children to help you stocking it. So let them choose some books, suggest some books that they want in their book corner. You can also borrow books from last year's teacher, so that when they transition, so when you get to September and they're moving up to your classroom, what about borrowing some of their favourites from their previous classroom, putting those into your book corner, so they've got some familiar books to get going. On the same lines as that, think about the pitch of the books in your book corner. Do you have sufficient books for all of your readers to read? What tends to happen in book corners is that you have lots of books that the more capable readers can access, and less books for the strivers and the reluctant readers. And so you need to have books for all of them. So you need to know their reading ages so that you've got books that they can access. And what you can do with that, once you've managed it, is to rotate that stock. So the stock you have in September is different to the stock you've got in February or July, because the children improve as readers. And that's where that swapping books with last year's class can come in really, really handy, because you can rotate that stock. And rotate the stock with your partner teacher if you're in a 2-form entry school, for example, because you can keep it fresh and you can change the books between the two classes. Store the books visually, so that in an enticing visual way. So face out. Publishers spend a fortune on artwork for books, and yet if you store it with the spines showing, you don't see it. So put it outwards so that it entices children to read. Consider organising your stock, not necessarily by alphabetical order for fiction or Dewey for non-fiction, but make boxes. So it could be topic boxes, it could be author boxes, it could be theme boxes, so that the children can find what they're looking for really, really easily. Right, story times. Have them, make sure they happen. Us reading aloud to children is a really powerful pedagogy. It's about fluency, we've talked about that. It's about enjoyment. It is about us often reading books that the children wouldn't choose themselves, exposing them to vocabulary that they may not otherwise encounter, because bookish vocabulary is so much richer than our ordinary conversation. So making sure they happen even in Key Stage 2. The real experts, the university academics in reading for pleasure, will say every single day. I tend to say every single day in Foundation and Key Stage 1, and at least 3 times a week in Key Stage 2. And that's me just being realistic about the pressure of curriculum on teachers. Learn to love it. You don't have to read a long book. If you're really stretched for time, you could read some poetry. And I had a very difficult class many years ago, and I used to read poetry to them as a sort of way to calm them down. So things would be getting a bit angsty in the classroom, and I would bring out a poetry book, read something to them, and it would just calm things down. It would save me from having to escalate people through the behaviour strategy. And eventually we got to a situation as well where they would say, oh, you're reading that one, miss, brilliant, can we join in? And, you know, become this collective story time. Another thing that you can do if you're a little bit short for time is if you lead an assembly, make it a bookish assembly. So when I was a deputy head and I had to deliver an assembly every single week as well as teaching my class, I used to get a picture book and I used to scan it and drop it into a PowerPoint that I would project onto the hall wall, so that I could share that book with every single person in the school. And I'd find books that tied in with our theme for the week. And what it meant was that everybody in school had heard reading taking place that day. And so it's helping out the other members of staff because the readings happen that day. The children have heard a grown-up read to them, but you also create that sense of community in that all of you have shared that book together, and you've got that touchstone then, haven't you, that you can all refer to as you build your knowledge of texts together.
That's a great answer there, Rachel, because I'm just going back to what you said earlier about the book corners, because you know, when it comes to September, lots of teachers, myself included, I was really proud of your book area, and you see lots of elaborate stuff, and then sometimes you think, well, what about the books? It's like having this beautiful car with no engine. It won't go anywhere. It's the same thing. If you have a lovely book area, but you've got to focus as much time, more so on the books themselves. And like you said, with the reading as a teacher, for one, you've got to be excited and enthusiastic about as you read as well. Otherwise, the children will notice that you're not interested, or you've got 5 minutes to fill. You've got to put importance on reading. But also, I think, some of my kids I read to 2, 3, 4 times a week. As much as you hope that the parents read to them at home, I know some of them, the only time that an adult will read to them will be during the primary school week when I'm reading to them. So it's more so important for those children as those ones that get read to at night at home. So I think we've got to put that importance on reading. They've got to hear, we're expecting the children to read in a certain way. They've got to hear it be modeled. It's got to be modeled. Otherwise, how can you expect the children to talk about pitch and tone if they're not hearing it anywhere? So they've got to hear it. And who better to hear it from than their teacher to model it for them? I love it. I love it when the bell, just before the bell goes and I have to go and they have to stop and they're like, oh, and they're that, you've got them. That is, if you can bottle that, and you take it through to the next day and they're like, Miss, don't want to read the next chapter because and they're excited, and you go, well, we'll read it later on. And I think we should go with that. And also with changing the book. So I have a set of my own books in school that I've collected, some ones that I love, and breadth of books as well. I constantly rotate them, and when I put a new rotation in, I have those, when you have like a bookshelf with the squares, I think I got it from IKEA somewhere. My top left one, my rotation, I put those, that black and yellow tape around, so no one's allowed to touch those books for the first 2 weeks, and then during the third week at some point I rip that tape off and they're allowed to then look at these books, and now they just go whoosh and there, and they're grabbing books up and then they're reading those because they've not been allowed to read those for the first 2 weeks. And I rotate them within them. So I think rotating the books, otherwise if they go to the reading area to choose a book and it's just the same books that they've browsed through and they're not interested in at that time, then it'll just be like wallpaper to them. We need to sort of continue to swap and change the books. Okay, my next question is this. So how should we approach teachers of any gaps with children that have been identified in learning? And is it intervention based, like taking the children out, or is it in the classroom? So how do you see it?
Everybody needs to access that high quality teaching together. And that's not just about the learning, that's about the culture of the classroom. It's that sense of belonging and that community that we build. The thought that there could be that child in your class that is never there when you're introducing the text, for example. They're never there when you are explaining how to do the work because they're out doing intervention. And that's not to denigrate intervention. It's not to say that they shouldn't be out doing intervention. There is a time and a place. But I think that everybody needs to be together as often as possible.
100% agree, Rachel, which really leads me into my next question, actually, nicer. So what do you think the support needs to look like for teachers and educators?
I'm going to refer to, again, the Ofsted report into English that came out at the end of May of this year. And it's a really interesting report because it starts off with what is English, what are the results like in English, what does pedagogy look like in different phases, so early years, and then different aspects of English such as reading, writing, grammar, for example. And then it's got a little section on leadership and systems. And in that section, it talks about the importance of CPD, specifically for English leaders in primary schools, and then for them to be putting CPD in place with their colleagues. And it's really important. We have to keep on top of what we need to do. We've got a statutory requirement for children to learn to read initially through systematic synthetic phonics. And so we need to ensure that everybody is trained to do that. And that's even that year 6 teacher that says, but I don't need to do it, because you never know if there's going to be, like, lots of people off sick and they have to do a cover, or they get moved around, or that they have a group of children for whom they still need to be using the language of blending and segmenting, for example, so therefore feel secure in what they're doing. So we've got that. Then we've got things like comprehension. And I said to you earlier, there are so many ways that we actually infer. And so it's making sure that everybody has at their fingertips the knowledge, the actual content knowledge, but also the pedagogical skills in order to be able to teach children how to infer from text, how to retrieve, how to summarize what they've been reading. And all those other aspects of English that then impact upon reading, such as vocabulary and grammar and fluency and pleasure. So I think CPD is really important. And I say that, yes, as somebody that delivers CPD, but also as somebody who seeks CPD. I still engage in professional learning because I haven't got all the answers and things change. Now, I've spoken so far about CPD really in that sort of frame of training. But actually, CPD isn't just training, is it? It is going and watching your colleagues deliver, for example, a guided reading lesson, a whole class guided reading lesson, and then talking to them about how they undertook that lesson. It might be about doing team teaching. It could be about professional reading. Now, in this office that I'm sat in here, there's that bookshelf, and there's another one over here, and they're crammed with professional books about reading, writing, vocabulary, grammar, spoken language, because we need to read about our subject as well. And often when people talk about CPD, they're thinking of training, but reading can be really, really important as well, and reading around the topic. And we're here talking on a TTS, question and answer session. And TTS commissioned lots of people, myself included, to write CPD blogs and articles to help teachers. And I think it's pointing at that type of CPD resource to teachers as well, and saying you can engage in some learning by reading these articles by people who have read all the books in this office and digested it into a manageable chunk for you to read on your own. So you saw how excited I got there talking about CPD, but does that answer your question?
So basically, the short answer to that, Rachel, is get Rachel Clarke into your school.
Exactly.
And you'll be absolutely fine. So that's pretty much, yeah, paraphrase, that's what we need to do. Honestly, do you know what, Rachel? I'm going to go into school tomorrow. I mean, I'm not going to ask for glue sticks because, it's difficult time.
You don't get them.
Yeah. But I'm going to say, I spoke to Rachel Clarke yesterday, and honestly, we need her in our school. And I know this, just so you know, Rachel, that's going to happen tomorrow. I'll be going into school tomorrow. So we need Rachel, because it's your passion that shines through. And I think when someone's passionate about it, but then the knowledge is there as well, I think we're talking about reading, such an important thing for children, but we also need that teacher training and that time to be able to, progress ourselves as teachers, to be able to teach a reading, to be able to get the best out of the children. I think with what you do, it sounds, I'm going to, so Rachel, I'm going to be contacting you after this.
Fantastic.
Sure. And I'm sure anyone that listens to this will probably do the same as well. Right. I'm just going to go to the inclusive side of it. So how do you think future approaches need to be adapted to create a more inclusive learning environment?
Yeah. Inclusion is interesting, isn't it? Because we've got a lot of different aspects of inclusion. We've got clearly children who have got needs in terms of special educational needs or disabilities, and ensuring that they're included through resources, through adult support, through differentiation, through practical apparatus, for example, to ensure that they can access the curriculum. Inclusion also makes me think about that broader idea of how do we feel included in society and representation. And so it makes me think about gender, it makes me think about social class, it makes me think about disability, ethnicity, those ways that children view themselves and whether they are included in your school's provision. And because we've been here all day talking about books and about reading, it's ensuring that part of our provision includes those children. So making sure we've got books that have children from different ethnic backgrounds. And we know that through the research from the CLPE, we're getting good at this, we're getting better at it, but there's a long way to go. I think it's over 30% of our children come from minority ethnic backgrounds. But at the moment, whilst we've made headway, we haven't got a situation where over 30% of our books have a protagonist who is from a minority ethnic background. And so it's making sure that we're aware of that, having books that represent children with disabilities. I've got one somewhere in this office at the moment by Clarke Cashmore, one of our Paralympians. It's called Splash. And it's a little girl who is afraid of swimming. She's afraid of water. But Clarke Cashmore has a disability as well. She doesn't have, one of her arms isn't complete. What's so lovely about that book is, and she says this in the preface to the book, is that the book focuses on her fear of water, but she's represented in that book through how her arm, her disability is represented, but never ever chatted upon. And it's just a really subtle but effective way of making children who've got a physical difference feel included in the choice of books that there are in the classroom. And I think making sure, for example, that we don't have and I don't think we do this so much nowadays, certainly when I was little we did, but ensuring that our books represent children from different socioeconomic backgrounds. Certainly when I was growing up, children in books tended to be very middle class, but making sure that the children in books live in tower blocks, for example, live in the city, don't live in the countryside and have jolly good picnics with ginger beer and so on, but represent and include all of our children in those choices.
And what's the name of that book again, Rachel? Because our school is an inclusive school for children with physical disabilities. So we've got resource provision. And the beautiful thing about that is from reception until year 6, we have a complete mix of children that from our kids in reception are just used to seeing children with disabilities. But we don't have the books that represent, and like you said, it's not the disability itself, it's the fear of the water, but it's there and it's really subtle. I love that. What's that book called again?
It's called Splash, and I think it's called Splash. I can't put my hand on it. No, I'm frantically looking around thinking, where is it? It's by Clarke Cashmore, and she's a Paralympian, and it is lovely for that reason, that it's very subtle in that it's dealing with the emotional literacy, but then you've got that representation of her disability. And then you might have seen another one about disability, which is called What Happened to You? And I can't recall the name of the author, but it's a little boy who is an amputee. So he doesn't have one of his legs. And he's in a playground playing quite happily at pirates, and then some other children come along and they point at him, go, "What happened to you? Where's your leg? What happened?" And it's about him saying, "I don't want to talk about it. That's not very polite. Can we just get on with playing, please?" That one is more direct in that it's very much about, this is how to talk to other children who've got a disability. But it's still really good, isn't it, for children that have got a disability to see themselves represented in literature in that way.
Definitely, 100%. And yes, I'm going to end up buying. This is what happens when I talk to people about books. I'll write them down, and then I'll finish the chat, and I'll be like on Amazon and getting stuff, and I'll get in trouble off my wife for getting stuff sent home. But there we go. So it's bringing me to the cross-curricular. So do you have any ideas how to bring skills into other areas of curriculum to offer more opportunities? So reading not just as in like the English lesson, across everything.
Yeah, and this is when this is the purpose, really, isn't it? Or one of the purposes. We want children to enjoy reading. We want them to choose to read, but we need them to read to access information. And that's where the skills come into play. And if you're in your geography, your history, your RE lesson, and they're using those skills learned in the reading lesson in order to access the curriculum. So it's really, really important. I think, as with other aspects of cross-curricular learning, it's reminding them about what they've learned and how to apply it. And it's using the same language. So if we're asking them to find some information, it's reminding them that they have to retrieve. They need to put their finger on the evidence. They need to show you where that information is in the book. It's also being aware of what our children need in terms of reminders. Lots of teachers use little bookmarks, for example, so that when they are reading in a cross-curricular lesson, they are being reminded about read it once to get the gist, read it a second time to identify any vocabulary you don't understand, read it a third time to start asking questions about the text. Or it could be bookmarks, again, have got some of those key prompts about, for example, retrieving, inferring, summarizing, for example. So those kind of strategies can be quite useful, and are joining the dots and making those reading lessons purposeful to the children.
That's fantastic, Rachel. And this brings me to the most important thing that we're going to talk about is children. So the little people that that I get to teach, and you get to help other teachers teach as well. So so I work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and I work Monday to Thursday in a year 3-4 class. And the other day I do consultancy. I do lots of other things. I've written a book a couple of years ago, and I do lots of other things on the day off. I call it my day off from my class, and they're always interested in what I do. And I've been speaking through the little lockdown, talking about the people that I'm going to speak to, and I explained who you are, and we had to look at your website because I said you've got a website, so that means you're really important when you have a website. So we had a look at your website, and we talked about the conversation. I told them some of the questions that I was going to speak to you about, and they wanted to create some questions, and they have 5. I've got a few questions for you here. Some of them are quite random, but then it's kind of a reflection on kind of what I'm like in the class, which I love. But I love these questions. Okay, so the first one is from one of my year 3 children. It's from William, and he asks, which books get you lost? Because I always talk about getting lost within the page of book. Now, this could be a really, really long answer. I realize that, but which books get you lost?
Oh my goodness, there are so many. I like big worlds, so fantasy books will get me lost. Anything where there is a big, complex world, I'm lost to that. Things like, for children, that would be things like Redwall, which I know is really, really old school now. But I'm going to mention the best book I've read recently, which also happens to be the best book I've read for a couple of years, and that is When the Sky Falls by Phil Earle. And that is suitable for children in year 6 and just at the lower end of Key Stage 3 as well. Oh my goodness, what a book. It's perfect. And I lost myself in it so much that I cried and cried and cried.
Do you know what? That's what books can do as well. And what a great answer that is. And great question from William as well.
Yeah, well done, William.
My next question is from Oliver. Now, I've got 3 Olivers. So this is Oliver 1. I've got 3 different Olivers in class. And he said, this is because of something I've said to them before. Describe what a book smells like, the pages within a book. How could you describe that? If possible.
It is impossible. Oh, so it's, you know that word petrichor, which is the smell of the pavements when it's rained after a period of hot, and you get that gorgeous musky umami type smell that comes off the pavement. Books have got that smell, particularly ones that have been sitting on your shelf for ages, and you smell them and they have got that really savory umami smell about them. So that's on the literal level. And then on a metaphorical level about the smell of books, I think they smell of magic, don't they? Because they can transport you. Now I'm going to paraphrase Roald Dahl very badly from Matilda, but books allow you to travel all over the world from your swingy chair in your office. You know, they are just magic. So they smell of savory umami pavements and magic.
We should if we could bottle that, we would sell thousands upon thousands and thousands to teachers, to people that read books, and no one's done it yet. I don't know why. Why has this not happened yet?
Don't know.
It needs to happen. Right. My next question is from one of my year 4 girls, Daisy, who has round glasses because she loves Harry Potter. Hopefully you'll see Daisy. But Daisy's asked, what's your favorite word and why?
Filibuster. It genuinely is. And when I do vocabulary training, I always mention it. So filibuster is a favorite word for me for 2 reasons, possibly 3. One is I love the sound of it. It's just got the most gorgeous sound, hasn't it? Filibuster. It's light and it trills and it trips off the tongue. And I love the sound of it. The second reason I like it is I'm really into politics. I love politics. Just before I came on to talk to you, I was listening to a politics podcast. I just love all the plotting and the moving around and the things that people say that don't quite mean what they say. And I just love all of that. I find it truly, truly fascinating. And filibuster is a word that is used in politics. And it's used, and this is almost where we get into the third reason why I like it. It's used when you want to shut down your political opponent's motion or the law that they're trying to pass. And to filibuster means that you talk and you talk and you talk and you talk and you talk to waste the time that's been allocated in a debate so that the law can't be passed. And then you might have got a little hint and a flavour of this. This is the third reason. It's about talking. I talk a lot. I really do talk a lot. Daisy, filibuster is my absolutely favourite word.
My class are going to love the word filibuster. It really does sort of roll, doesn't it? Filibuster.
Yeah.
It's a nice, lovely word. And this brings me to my next question. This is from Jasmine. Jasmine's one of my year 3 children. She's just said, because I talked about what you do, she's asked, are you good at Scrabble? That's her question.
I'm not bad, but I'm not tactical enough. So I like it. I like making words. I like learning all those 2-letter words that are really important to be good at Scrabble. But my sister's younger than me, and she, ever since she's been on this earth, she's been able to do everything I can do, but at a quicker stage and better. And she will beat me hands down at Scrabble every single time because she's a strategist. And my mum's pretty good at it as well, and she's also a strategist. Yeah, I do like Scrabble, but I'm not the best at it.
Have you used the word filibuster in a Scrabble?
I've never had the chance. Yeah, I'd love to.
That's got to be done. That's your next challenge. And to beat your sister with that one word.
Oh, it'd be great. I'd love that.
And then you could filibuster along and explain why you like that. Right, my last question. This is quite a deep one. And there's a bit of a backstory to this one. So this is from Chloe, one of my year 4 girls. And this is something I talk to them about all the time. So her question to you is, what do you want to be when you grow up? Now, the reason why she's asked that question is because I always talk to my kids, I didn't start teaching until I was 30 because I was very shy in school. I hated literacy. I really didn't like books when I was at school. I had quite a negative attitude, but now English is one of my favorite things. And then we were talking, this was 2 years ago. I was talking to children, what do you want to be when you grow older? What do you want to be when you grow up? And they were talking about what they'd like to be. One of the girls in my class, Chloe, a different Chloe, said to me, Mr. Hunt, what do you want to be when you grow up? And it floored me. I was like, gosh, well, so I said, well, I've always wanted to write a book. And she said, well, if you're telling us we can be scientists and illustrators and authors and all this, why don't you become one too? So I actually did write a book for my daughter about my daughter. And that's where I go to schools and I talk about, it's a rhyming book, and I go to schools. And because of my class challenging me to write a story, I eventually written a book. So my question is to you, what do you want to be when you grow up?
It's a great question. If I gave this up, which I'm not going to, or I had my time again, if I were a younger person and I didn't choose to be a teacher and then to do the job I do now, I would be a tree surgeon, because I love being outside. I adore trees. I quite like the idea of climbing up them as well. And I have a massive tree in my back garden here. I've got an oak tree in my back garden, and I would love to be able to climb it and look after it.
You know what, that's a fantastic answer. That's lovely, because one of my favorite, going back to William's question, which books get you lost, the first book that I got lost was to do with the tree, was the Magic Faraway Tree. That series of books, that was the first book that I remember being just completely just lost. I absolutely lost myself within those pages, and my imagination used to run wild. And those were the first books that got me into reading, the back door into reading. So yeah, that is the fact you've got this big tree and you want to be a tree surgeon, it links nicely there. And that's where books come from as well, from trees. So that's a perfect way to finish. So thank you so much. It was great to speak to you, and I hope to speak to you again sometime soon.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've loved it.